Quarterly meeting of the Board of Finance, May 13th. Can we stand up and start with the pledge? We're going to ask Mr. Becker, it's Mr. Becker's birthday tonight. We won't sing, but we will have Mr. Becker start us with the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm always happy when I know the words.
Okay, good evening. Our agenda tonight, as it is written, but it will change. Item number 1 is to approve the minutes. But we mentioned in our last meeting that we were going to move the minutes to our June regular meeting. So we will not be going over the minutes tonight, and once we get a quorum, we'll take that vote and we'll move that over to the June meeting. Item number 2 is to review the current status of the town's pension and Opeb funds. Item number 3 is to review the Board of Ed financial positions versus budget as of quarter 3, fiscal year 14. Item number 4, review the town financial position versus budget as of quarter 3, fiscal year 14. And then finally, to discuss the Board of Assessment Appeals process and timing. What we're going to do, though, and I thank Brian, is we're going to begin with the Board of Ed. Board of Ed will come up first, and we'll discuss the Board of Ed financial position versus budget as of Q3, fiscal year 14. Dr. Title? First, is there any questions from the board? We're okay?
Right.
Okay.
Probably is the most up-to-date information is the projected expenses as of April 30th, which is this document here.
Right. Does everybody have that document?
Does everybody have that? Was distributed. Looks like this. Well, it may not be in color. It's got Board of Ed projected expenses as of April 30th. Because we do our quarterly report, and there's better news here, so thought you'd want to maybe focus here. We can answer questions about anything. So what Doreen has done with this is track what our deficit was looking at over a period of time. So there's a lot of historical information on there, with the bottom line in the lower right-hand corner being the most current information. Last time we were here, we had projected a deficit of $469,526. That was sort of where we thought we were going to be, and that was kind of the discussion was, how are we going to make that up? And there was discussion with the first selectman, because it was during the budget process as well, while we were doing the budget. And we had worked that down previously from some estimates that were $750,000 or more, and we were working our way down. And then in the quarterly report that Doreen prepared, that's a more detailed report, we had managed to shrink that projection down to $300,427. And I reported to the Board of Ed in the May 6th meeting that the current projected deficit is currently listed as $102,790, but that we expected, given the encumbrances we have and keeping our fingers crossed of no calamities, that we would finish the year in the black, or at least at zero. And therefore, while we appreciated all the discussion and the willingness of the boards to bail us out if necessary, we are pleased to report that that will not be necessary, and that we will finish the year, and that and I had told the first selectman that any freezing of funds he had done on his end, I remember the discussion in March was, we're going to freeze some purchases, we're going to not buy some books, we're going to, there was some real impact on the town side, and I wanted to give him his heads up as quickly as possible so that if they could, if they were counting on that to help bail us out, that was no longer necessary. And so that's where we are right now. If I had known on January 2nd that we were going to be able to do this, I could have saved everybody a lot of angst, including ourselves and you all, and lots of time figuring this thing out. What are we going to do? But there was no way I could see this situation reasonably happening, and if I had waited 3 more months and said nothing and just said, yeah, I think we have it under control, and come in April and said, oh, oops, by the way, we're way in the hole, then I think that would not have played too well. So we kind of erred on the side of caution with that when we were looking at a deficit which was over 1.4 million back on December 31st of 2013. Several favorable things happened in the last month or two, and the numbers are in column 7 is really where the good stuff happened. Our hiring freeze continued to pay dividends. We don't normally get a lot of turnover this late in the season, and sometimes we don't get it in positions that we can leave vacant. And it just happened that we had several non-instructional positions be vacant. It's not ideal, but we're not filling them. Custodial positions, maintenance positions, these kind that help. And a lot of what's happened, if you trace it all the way across, is that special ed tuition, which spiked in that 3-month period ending December 31st, actually just started flattening out and sort of regressing to the mean. And so a lot of this was special ed tuition deficit that initially we were looking at $1.3 million in the hole, has shrunk to $826,000 in the hole. There's $500,000 of it right there. And that's the ebb and flow of special ed. It's a very volatile account. And so it worked, it worked in our favor. And that was a big part of it. And then the schools were able to give us back some money. Our legal fees were a little more under control, and we continued to reap some of the benefits of some lower electricity costs, and we had no calamities. I think the town had the same situation. Remember, we talked about budgeting for 1.5 storms or whatever it was. We had set aside some money for a couple storms, and they didn't happen. So that was probably worth, for us, $75,000. So a combination of things. I mean, I'd like to attribute it all to great fiscal management, but in all honesty, some things just broke our way, and just like they didn't break our way to cause the problem, in some cases, they broke our way to help us solve it. So we're within shouting distance, and we really appreciate your board's willingness to entertain helping out, but at this point, we don't need it. Doreen, you want to add anything?
Thank you, Dr. Title. From my perspective, you definitely did the right thing by bringing this to the town and to the board when you did, because who could know that a $1.4 million deficit could come down? But I feel I should definitely congratulate you and your staff for the fiscal restraint. Yes, some things broke your way, but there's other items on here that was just fiscal discipline or decisions that were made to stop spending. You look at the hiring freeze was $275,000. And the schools pitched in from following this all the way across of a savings of $297. You had instruction come in at a savings of $301, and then technology of $227. You go on down. That is fiscal restraint. That's not things breaking your way.
Right. No, we definitely held back on spending of some items. We're really deferring them. I mean, let's face it, at some point you've got to buy books and replace your computers. But yeah, wherever we could, I think people did a good job in the organization following the directive, maybe too well.
Right. I'm sure, it came with some pain. I'm sure not everybody was happy with it, but everyone did what they had to do. And then the savings of $500,000, did we get additional funds from the state?
Yeah, actually, we did. I think we captured that in an earlier projection. That wasn't something that happened in the last month. But you might remember the special, I don't know, maybe it was if we talked about this in March or this happened later, but the special ed excess cost grant from the state which we had projected at coming in at 75% of eligible, came in a little bit north of 80. So that was about $150,000. And, you know, who could ever predict that you'd get more state revenue than you projected? I mean, that never happens. That's like a fantasy world. So, and we also had to wait for the second part of it. You know, we file in December, and then they give you an estimate, and then you file again in March, and they give you another updated estimate based on everything else that's going on, and it held, which was amazing, because it can also fall apart in 3 months. So that was very helpful. I mean, that really offset the other problem, which was one of the reasons we had the deficit in the first place, is the federal government cut their special education subsidy to the school district. And so that kind of made us whole on that.
Well, maybe 80% will be the new number. We'll see, right?
That would be great for next year. We'll see. They did not increase the kitty in the state budget for that this year, so.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Any comments from the board? Any questions from the board on this number? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's a great job.
Yeah. We do have to address, obviously, at some point down the road, the health insurance situation for the following, you know, in the future. You have that information in here.
Right.
And, you know, we'd like to work on a remedy for that, you know, might include the board being made whole for a sum of money that was transferred out of our health insurance fund to the town a number of years ago. So I put that out for seasoning as opposed to a decision. So.
The worksheet Dr. Title's referring to is the medical retention fund
Right.
sheet. Does everybody have that?
Right.
Okay. Is there-
I mean, now that you've shown yourself so good at fixing deficits, we'll be
We'll see,
okay.
we'll
now.
work on that one. Yeah, that one's gonna be a little harder. Well, we'll see. You know, sometimes these things do repair themselves, but, and we're okay for this year. It's really a future out year problem, so, I know you were concerned about it, but, you know, we did do some research, and there was a time when, so if I can take the bailout money that we don't need for this, we'll take it in health insurance. Anyway,
We have reviewed
all right,
this.
I'll leave now.
Before we let Dr. Title run to the back door.
Right, that's okay.
Is there any questions or discussions on the medical retention fund? Again, we have discussed it. We discussed it during the budget. But we'd be glad to entertain any questions. Mr. Becker?
No, but, yeah, that was, I think, in one of the emails in the last couple of days. I mean, that's going to, we'll have the conversation, but in a month or two, or
It's coming,
something
yeah.
along those lines. I mean, yeah, maybe it's worth having before this fiscal year's end, but, I mean, in reality, at one point, one way or another,
Right. It's probably,
we all view it as the whole town's number at the end of the day.
Right.
Right, so.
yep. All right.
Mr. Clardy, you had anything? Looked like you're good. Mr. Wall? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Appreciate it. Glad to be the bearer of good news.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on, Mr. Vahey, to review the current status of the town's pensions and Opeb funds. Welcome, Brian.
Good evening. I'd like to start off with the smaller one, the Opeb. A little easier to analyze. It's grown to 16 million as of the end of March. And nothing exciting to report there. It's in a pretty simplistic allocation that we talked about because of its dollar amount. I will say that on the last page, you can look at the returns. So last 9 months, I guess, would be a good number to look at. 12.6%, which is higher than the actuarial assumption that's on that one. Are there any questions with the OPEB?
No, but last 9 months is the best number to look at, right? Yeah, Mr. Brackfeld?
Related to the investment choices or anything. You said that the fund is in this, I would think actually, preferred method personally. I mean, I like this simple index fund method. you said it's because of the size of the fund. Is there a talk within you guys as to what point this thing grows big enough that you want to manage it differently?
What we did was we looked at where we could leverage our existing investments in the main fund, like where asset managers would allow a smaller mandate. So the fixed income actually falls under that umbrella. I believe it's with Wells. But on the equity side, we didn't have that choice. So it's really when it gets to where we're not going to be charged excessive fees to sort of mirror the same investments, I think is when we'll make that switch. I think we're a ways away. I think 10 million is kind of a per asset class.
Per
is
asset
probably
class.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Brackfeld. Anybody else on OPEB from the board? Okay, Brian?
And if we move to the main fund, you could see that it's approaching $350 million. The only, since I was last here, I think the largest change would be actually a beginning of a funding in the private equity. I think for a long time we've seen it be a very low number, even though it's a 5% allocation. You have to wait for them to request the money, so it's a slow ramp up. But we started to fund Lexington's next offering, so you see that number, probably last time we were here was less than 1%, so now we're at 1.78%. And the money for that came from the domestic equity, which has always been running a little bit high because that's where we've parked the money, because it's most, it's the closest related asset class that's like private equities, just, public equities. So for the last time we were here, you see domestic equities probably has gone down and it's gone up in private equity. Other than that, I think everything is done pretty well, all things considered. Commodities have been taking a beating, but this year they're coming back in favor, so that's been coming up. Our hedge funds, I mean, if you've been reading the paper, it's been a rough year for hedge funds, but we're in a sort of, our selections are, we have some fund-to-funds and we pretty much conservative offerings, and so 2 of the 3 have been doing pretty well this year. Canadas is a long-short fund, and they're muddling along. I wouldn't say they're doing great. And our fixed income, for all the gnashing of teeth about how badly the bond market was supposed to be, and we've stayed the course as far as keeping our allocation, and lo and behold, they're actually doing better than treading water for the the periods you see here. And once again, on the last page, look at returns. Very similar numbers to the OPEB, 12.73% for 9 months.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to the board. Any questions, comments? We're letting Mr. Vahey off easy. Mr. Becker?
Not so fast. This is
Almost. I was about out the door.
So you're parking them in the domestic equity. I think we talked about this at the last time you were here. Do we have some idea, though, on the timetable of getting them into the private equity mix? And I ask more with kind of the rally that's sort of, we've done very well with the domestic equity, but obviously there's a concern of that, at some point kind of reeling in. So if we're parking in there, we're kind of exceeding the guidelines. Do we
We're
think
not.
soon enough, or?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. We are not exceeding any guidelines.
Well, your target, not necessarily, your target is
Right.
25. You're up 30% of the fund now is in.
Yeah, we're allowed up to
Right.
35. So I mean,
Yeah, I'm not-
it's a nice band. I would say that a better way to think of it as far as public versus private equity, I mean, those asset classes move very similarly. That's why we're parking the money there. You actually hope to get a little higher returns in the private equity space because you're giving up liquidity. So I mean, if anything, we're sort of hurting ourselves by not being able to fund it. But I mean, we aren't in control. These funds, they have to identify investments, and they make a capital call, and then we write checks. So that's how it works. We have actually asked Mesro what's taking them so long, because they actually, Mesro is actually, you can think of as a fund-to-fund of private equities. So in theory, it should have been a faster ramp-up, and it's been a little slower. But other than that, there's not much we could do. We're not going to be adding another name, for sure. And we're going to see Lexington 2 is actually in the drawdown phase. So they've been selling all their investments, harvesting, and we've been getting flows coming to us. So hopefully the other two will ramp up in such that we'll get to our 5%. But we actually projected, for time context, Bob, do you remember how the study that Tom Shingle gave it? I thought
It's
it was
4 to 5 years before.
total, right? But
Yeah.
it started in 2000,
We're talking 3 more years before we get up to the 5%.
somewhere around there. I believe that was the number. So looking at 16, 17 as far as what years, 2016, 17, before
Gotcha.
we're at a steady state. And then it should actually be easier to stay there, because as stuff rolls out, hopefully we'd be funding new mandates, so we'd keep closer to that. But
And you said Lexington 2 is basically on its way out at this point, but you're not adding any more in, or will there at least be some sort of replacement for that? I know it's going to take obviously a couple of years to wind them down, but
our target, I believe, the first, yeah, it's 5%. I believe it's sort of around 2.5% for each fund. So it really should be, in an ideal state, you'd have 2.5% in Mesro and 2.5% in Lexington funds. So we actually have selected the second Lexington fund as our new investment, and they did very well. We like their strategy. We know the managers. So no, it should eventually be steady state, two different, those two funds. So it's just a matter of hopefully Mesro kicking it in gear. And I was going to look from a return standpoint too. You can see 11.85 over a 3-year period for Lexington 2, and I think we'll continue to see decent returns because it's done really well overall with their investments, even though they haven't reaped them all.
okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Becker. Back to the board. Any questions? Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And moving on. Now, the next item on the agenda is to review the town financial position. But I just throw this out there to the board and Mr. Mayor. Should we have Mr. Ross come up?
I think we should have Mr. Ross.
Is that okay with the board? Have Mr. Ross come up before we review the town financial position? So, Mr. Ross. So we're here to discuss the Board of Assessments appeals, the BAA process, and timing. And just where this came from, last Thursday, as we were looking at the schedule for setting the mill rate presented by Mr. Mayor, he gave us a bunch of schedules, and on Schedule C is the BAA adjustments, the final adjustments. And the question, there were two questions. One is, why the significant decrease year over year in the grand list? And two, we'd like to talk about the timing of the information.
Okay.
So I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Did they get this? Okay. Draw your attention to the summaries that I did for 14 and for 13. Let me talk about 14.
Documents.
Yes.
One is the summary document, which is what he'll be working off of.
And the summary document is 14 on top and 13 on
Yeah.
the second page, right?
Thank you.
And on 14 specifically, I want to draw your attention to that highlighted area. Dark highlight, everybody got it? What I did for, just a broad overview, what I did for both years was to stratify the reductions. As you can see, I stratified 25,000 to 500,000, 500 to $1 million, $1 million to $1.5 million, et cetera. What I found happened this year in 2014, and again, these are actions of the Board of Appeals. It's a board that's independent of the assessor's office. we had approximately 21 appeals, which were of properties that had assessed values in excess of $1.5 million. Okay, last year, there were 4 appeals in excess of properties with assessments in excess of $1.5 million. So I think part of the reason for the difference between last year and this year is the number of properties that appealed that had assessments in excess of $1.5 million. If you zoom in on that highlighted area, if you average the percentage of reduction, that average is approximately 15.72% for this year. Somebody can check my math, but if you average the 3, it's 15.72%. Last year, there were only 4 properties in that $1.5 million plus, okay, as you can see on the schedule, 5.69%. So I think that's where the bulk of the assessment reductions came. And again, it was the Board of Assessment Appeals that arrived at the valuation conclusions, the changes, okay?
Okay, and these other 2 worksheets, they're back
2
up to this?
Okay, that's what I wanted to explain. The 2 worksheets behind, you have, this is a summary page.
Right.
This is backed up by the actual appeals, which will give you the addresses, give you what the assessment was, what it was changed to, and the amount of change.
Okay. So basically what you're saying, the appeals were with higher value homes.
That's what the data's telling me.
Okay. What about commercial?
Commercial, we had, this year we had 4 properties. Okay, as you can see, that line there, commercial, industrial, real estate, 4 properties. Okay, there were no reductions on those 4 properties. It's in the detail. If you look at the detail, I know it's hard to read.
Yeah, what sheet, we are still on this sheet?
Yeah, if we go to the detail sheet, it'll give you the actual 4 properties that were, 4 commercial properties that were under appeal.
Okay.
Excuse me, if you look right underneath the first gray line on the summary sheet, the first line under the first gray line, that says, that shows you the 4 properties this year. And if you look at the same 1 property.
Okay, on the
all
detail
5
sheet-
of them were denied. Then when you go to the details sheet, those 4 and the 1 will be in the same
The
place.
top sheet is a
And
summary
then-
sheet.
Yeah.
Yep. that's it.
On the detail sheet, what description do you have for the commercial properties?
Okay, if you go, again, this was taken right from the inventory of appeals. So the detail sheet will give you 4 properties that were under appeal to the Board of Appeals for this past year. It's on page
It'd be on
1.
the first page.
First page, sort of on the top half, and it says 4 commercial properties. I know it's hard to read.
Oh,
Okay, there they are.
Kind of small. I
There
didn't-
they are.
And the properties are above the highlighted section,
Yeah.
not below. That's not a title, that's kind of like a, so 1's on Commerce, 2 on Black Rock, 1 on Frank Street,
Okay, and it's irrelevant because they were all denied.
and they're all denied.
All
Right.
right, so we're back to the...
Okay, now, we'll explain that. The board has a statutory option to not hear appeals of commercial properties that are assessed at over $1 million. The board exercised that option. So that's considered a denial.
Okay.
So-
They didn't even hear them.
There were no changes on those properties.
All right, so we're back to the residents. Okay, no, we'll go, oh, go ahead.
So will those continue on now to the courts, or will they drop those appeals?
They have, they can pursue those to the courts. The last decision date was March 20th, so they have until May 20th to file with the court.
One of those properties was under $1 million, and they just chose to deny that
They
as well?
denied it. That was an outright denial.
Denial, okay.
Right.
So they did review that one.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They reviewed all four. They deny the ones over $1 million.
Automatically every year?
Well, again, they voted not to hear appeals on commercial properties over $1 million. Again, that's statutory. They had the option to do that. There was one under $1 million, which they denied. They denied the appeal outright.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Walsh?
All right. We had some discussion of this at our Board of Finance meeting the last time. So out of all the remaining properties, specifically, why don't we start off with the 21 that you said were $1.5 million and above? That seems to be the driver, correct? What you-
From what the
Let
data
me
is-
interrupt a little bit. Just, if you look at, I think there's two numbers that are key. If you look at the second gray, light gray item
On which page? On which document?
on the summary page,
Summary page.
the first page, the top summary page, you go about two-thirds of the way across the page where it says percent reduction.
Yes.
That's 11.76%.
Yes.
Okay. Also want to go to the first numeric column, number of records, 120 records.
Yes.
So the 120 records and the percent reduction average was 11.76.
Mhm.
Go to the next page, same spots. Excuse me, I'm going to go, it's actually 11.69, I went to the wrong line. Go to the same spot on the next page. The number, instead of 129 properties, it's 122 properties, so almost the same number of properties, which took people by surprise since we're in the third year or fourth year of this. And but the percent reduction last year was 5.67. So the reductions percentages. So basically, it's not the number of properties, it's amount that was allowed as a reduction per property.
But your whole soliloquy there presumes that you know what the question I was going to ask was, which has nothing to do with what
But
you're
you
talking
did ask
about.
that question already. In fact, you made the statement. You said it was the high-range properties.
No, I didn't.
I'm saying it's not the high-range properties.
My
I'm
question
saying-
is nothing, my question
I know
is...
what your question,
You don't know what I'm driving at.
I don't know what you're driving at, you're totally correct. I don't know your question, totally correct.
You're
What
not
I
allowed
do
me to
know
ask
is
my
that you
question.
made a statement that I was correcting.
Well, I'm just quoting on the 21 appeals that were $1.5 million and above. That's where I last left it, and that's where my question stopped. And then, but it has nothing to do with what I'm about to ask. Okay, out of those 21 appeals, how many of them were in the beach area?
Look at the sheet, the backups. It was
Has any analysis
It
been
was-
done on where these were in town? Or whether they were based
generally,
on
they were
demolition?
they were
Because
the higher-end properties. There were some on Fairfield Beach Road. There were some on Sasko Hill. Again, go to the, this will,
that assumes I know where every street is in the beach area that was affected by Storm Sandy. There was some suggestion at our Board of Finance meeting the last time, which was one of the requisite reasons we asked to see you, to suggest that a lot of the streets, and Ms. LeClaire was good enough to call up the minutes of the meeting, and it seemed to be a lot of the streets were down in the beach area, and we had, Cinda was here the last time, and she suggested that she had been seeing a lot of applications for permits for demolition.
Yeah.
So the question I guess I'm having to you is, I'm looking to confirm that. Is a lot of this being caused by expensive houses that are in the beach area, that are being, because people are getting insurance money and things like that, people are seeking demolition permits so that they don't have to pay for the value of their house, just the value of the land, while they're going through construction now?
the bulk of the large activity, Jim, was, or the large assessments was Sasko Hill. If you look at, we have 9, 9, and 3, okay, 21 properties. Of those 21 properties, there were several in Sasko Hill, there were some in Greenfield Hill. There might have been, again, I don't want to talk without having a firm command of the facts. There were not a huge number, I think that's a safe way of saying, not a huge number of Fairfield Beach Road properties, although that can be confirmed by going through the spreadsheet. I can sort this spreadsheet up by address. That can be done. My immediate concern was looking at the numbers and saying, okay, what are the number trends? Okay, as opposed to the locales where the actual reductions were going on. Sasco Hill was one of the more prominent locations, let's put it that way.
So, in you reviewing this list, you don't believe then that a lot of this was being caused by houses that were damaged by Storm Sandy that have filed for demolition permits? Because that's the impression we were left with the last time.
The 21 properties, I'm referring only to
Okay.
the 21
Okay.
properties. The 21 properties, there were not an inordinate number of Fairfield Beach Road properties.
Okay.
And again, that can be confirmed by the data. I can, again, sort up the spreadsheet any way you want. We can look at it that way too if you want.
Out of the remaining other properties, were those a significant number of houses that were filed for demolition permits and had reductions reduced because of that so that they can have their houses repaired?
There were, I'd feel more comfortable doing a sort of the actual spreadsheet that I derived this from. Okay, and I'd be happy to produce that, not a problem. I can sort it up by street,
Okay.
and we can.
Well,
we
it'd
can-
just be good to know, because we were left with the impression at the end of our meeting last time, and it's one of the reasons we had requested to see you, to see whether an analysis had been done from the BAA adjustments that were done. And there seemed to be, we were kind of left with the thought that maybe there had been a lot of Storm Sandy demolitions and reconstructions going on, and that people, there were vacant lots that would be built on and all that stuff. And as you're sitting here now, by looking at you, I could tell you don't think that's the case.
Okay, I want to be clear here. There were a lot of demolitions, there were a lot of reconstructions that we're taking into account on the grand list, okay? Just from experience. There were not an inordinate number of appeals in that south of the Post Road area that specifically addressed, the storm damage. Okay, we were very careful in our analysis last year to make sure that those properties were canvassed and, they were treated properly.
Okay.
So, yes, there were Fairfield Beach area appeals, okay? Huge number. Again, I'd feel more comfortable sorting up the spreadsheet and giving you folks the sorted up spreadsheet by location and letting you, take a look at it. But, just experientially, I would not say there was an inordinate number of appeals. There were appeals. People were appealing, well, the storm has impacted our property. We think it's impacted the value, but we reminded people that the valuation basis is 2010. Okay, not current. So we had to kind of get that message out to people. We also got the message out to people that if there was physical damage, we need to know about it because we can adjust the records accordingly, okay, which we did prior to the Board of Assessment Appeals. I think my staff did an excellent job.
Okay. And that kind of leads me to something I've been thinking about since that last Board of Finance meeting. If somebody wants to pull a demolition permit because they're going to take the house down and they're going to reconstruct over the next year, year and a half, or whatever it's going to be, they can come to you prior to going to the BAA, correct?
Yeah.
So if they go through the normal course, they can come and say, we're demolishing the
Right.
house next Tuesday. We have a permit to do
Okay.
so. We're taking the house off the property. And will you just reduce it at that point in time?
Yeah, this is what we did. Let me explain what we did. This is, again, not involving the BAA. This is just involving our department. Deputy Assessor and myself canvassed the beach area, literally canvassed it, and drove up and down streets. There were a lot of properties in that area that hadn't pulled permits yet, that were damaged, okay, uninhabitable, no permits. They were obviously damaged. We did give some consideration because of the physical change of the real estate. We did give consideration for, again, the physical changes that were made, again, using the 2010 valuation basis. But we saw the physical changes, walls being torn down, sheetrock being ripped out, house not being lived in. Okay, no permits, because I guess people were waiting for insurance claims to process, that type of thing. We did pick up a lot that way where we had no permits, but we literally did a canvass of the area. So we think that may have helped with the Board of Appeals process this past year, where we kind of got the message out that, we're willing to work with people, we know what happened, but you got to tell us. When they told us, we would go down and do a physical inspection. So, again, getting back to the question about the specific locations of the properties, I'd be happy to send a spreadsheet. You can sort it up any way you want. That would probably answer your questions best.
Okay. You can jump in, Mary, for the same thing.
So my question is then, where do those type of reductions show up on your grand list? Would we see a separate line for those?
No, I didn't segregate the town. On the summary page, I didn't segregate the town. On the detail pages, again, which are the inventory of all the appeals, you have, see where it says property address? You can find out what the board did simply by looking up the property addresses. And again, if we sort the file up by property address, we get the answer to our question.
You okay, Mary? You have a follow-up? Go ahead.
Well, someone else can go while I...
All right, just
Yeah, I have a question which,
to Mr. Mayor.
is a little, I mean, I heard the same thing that Mr. Walsh heard last week about the demolitions, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that I'm not clear on at all, which is kind of relates to Ms. LeClaire's question. So we had a storm. The house was damaged. You and your crew went on a road trip. You looked at homes.
We do this on an ongoing basis.
You looked at homes. You found physical damage. Now, what I don't quite understand then is whether or not, based upon that finding, were adjustments made to the grand list, and if they were they just done solely by the efforts and work and decision-making authority of the assessor's office, or did they also go through the BAA and would appear on this list?
There were some, I'm thinking of one property in particular where I did inspect on the beach. House was gutted.
Were there
There
any
wasn't-
properties that you inspected that you adjusted that didn't go through the BAA, that your office adjusted alone?
Our office adjusted several that did not go to the BAA.
Okay.
This was prior to the October 1
This is prior
assessment.
to October 1. Okay. I was not aware of that activity.
So that answers some of the question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So, you all right, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah. it's-
Mr. Becker?
So so throughout the year, permits, things like that, we usually see the grand list go up, but there are other things that are having it go down throughout the year.
Correct.
So, I think to Mr. Walsh's question about if people do construction, we were sort of thinking that they just had to come in and go through the BAA process, have the house down, but they drop it in the middle of the year, they come and they let you know, you make that adjustment at that point, and that's just part of the number that you, come budget time, basically, when we get that new grand list number, the ups, the downs, everything, you then present, and then the only other adjustment at that point between that number and then what we saw the other night is the BAA adjustment at that point.
Let's explain the process. October 1 is the assessment date, okay? As of that date, we try to, as accurately as possible, reflect the physical characteristics of the properties, okay? We make sure that our inspections are up to date. We make sure that we followed up on not only the permits, but people who say, we want you to look at our house, we haven't taken out a permit yet, but there's physical damage. We do that around the assessment date of October 1 to capture the physical data accurately, okay? We include that in the assessment for October 1. The assessor certifies the October 1 grand list January 31st. Okay, we're certifying whatever was there on October 1, Okay, we process our personal property motor vehicles between October and the end of December or early January. We compile everything, total everything, and the assessor's list is signed January 31st. People have a right to go to the Board of Assessment Appeals every year, okay? So they're looking at their assessment as of October 1, in this case of 13, okay, and they're saying, well, you know, we don't agree with the assessment, or we have a difference of opinion. They have the right to go to the Board of Appeals, okay? They go to the Board of Appeals. The Board of Appeals can make further adjustments if they wish to. Again, that's an independent body. Our list is certified on January 31st. That's it. The Board of Appeals acts independently of the assessor.
Mr. Becker?
Well, so today's the 13th, right? So tomorrow I knock my house down. Come to you and tell you in the middle of May, you know, I've taken my house down. Do you do something at that stage, or I continue paying property tax as though there was a house there
Right, yes.
through the end of the year, even though there's nothing there?
Okay. The assessment, the bill that you're paying in July is based on the assessment as of October 1.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's 9 months later. Okay, so you're paying in July for what was physically there on October 1.
Okay.
You knocked the house down today. If you've done nothing to the property, October 1 of 2014, then your July of 2015 tax bill will reflect just a parcel with no improvements. But if you demolish the house now, okay, it's not going to impact your July 2014 bill, because your July 2014 bill reflects October 1 of 2013. It's what was physically there on October 1 of 2013.
Gotcha. So, okay, that's fine.
Let me go to Mrs. Leclerc first.
You can go to,
All right, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Further clarification question. For me, anyway, I think we're all learning something here tonight. I've been told multiple times by multiple people that there's a reval done, a valuation is put on a property, and then for the next 4 years until the next reval, you pay your taxes based upon that valuation, where the only, and that any appeals related back to the value of the house based upon that valuation, and that the only adjustments that could be made to that valuation were based upon demolition or damage to the point where the home, the residence was not habitable. What I'm hearing tonight is different than that. So I just want to confirm which is correct. Not confirm, find out.
Okay. Again, where the valuation basis is set in the year of the revaluation, the dollars. The dollar basis for your assessment for 5 years is set in the year of revaluation. Right now, we're using $2,010, okay, and applying them to a physical data set as it exists on the assessment date. So we're not changing dollars. Okay, we're changing, again, physical data sets, where if your house is damaged, okay, you don't have a permit, whatever, we see it's damaged, it's not habitable, we're treating it as a physically damaged structure, okay, and applying $2,010 to the physical status of the property as of October 1. So if on October 1 you were not able to inhabit the property and there was physical damage, we're going to acknowledge that there is physical damage, that physical damage is going to impact the assessment. Okay, but we're only applying physical data set to, again, the dollars that were established in the 2010 reval.
So if a tree falls on my house in the middle of the valuation period, my assessment would go down as of that date, even though it's on a part of the house that I can still live in the house.
Okay, as of October 1.
My assessment and my tax, not just, it falls down on March 15th. A tree falls on my house. So let's say my house is worth $1 million. Let's say the tree causes $100,000 worth of damage. Next assessment period is October 1, and I'm still living in the home. Is my home valued in that, and I haven't fixed it, is my home valued for assessment purposes at $1 million or $900,000?
If you have physical damage to your property, that you still could be living in the home, but if you have physical damage to the property, we're going to note that physical damage on the record. Okay, well, there are adjustments that are made accordingly. Because you're not going to be able to, again, market the property. Even though we're using $2,010, you're not going to be able to market for what you would be able to market for if, let's say, the house were whole. So we're reflecting physical data set, but we're using $2,010.
I think I'm clear, and this is a little different than what we heard last meeting, but you're being very clear.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mrs. Leclerc?
Okay, so if you're doing that, are you tracking then the building permits? So when the people then fix the property, you increase their
Yes.
taxes back to the...
Yes, we have a regular inspection routine, which we've had as long as I've been in the business. We canvass the town, we get building permits from the building department. We canvass the town, we note the physical characteristics of the properties that we're inspecting. We also note physical characteristics of properties that, again, as we mentioned, may not have the permits. Okay, we try to follow up on those. And we try to reflect the physical data as accurately as possible.
So now what if someone doesn't pull a permit? Like, are you still going to track these houses?
To the best of our ability. We again, depend upon people telling us the physical conditions of their property. If there's no permit, we sometimes pick things up in the field that, we'll contact the homeowner. We'll see something that we have a question on, that type of thing.
Okay. Yeah, I just didn't think you could reduce the value unless it was a total demolition.
No, because I'm thinking of one case on the beach where the house was gutted. Okay, and we have schedules that say, okay, if a house is gutted, then it's considered to be so many % complete. Okay, we have a gutted house, so many % complete. Okay, it's assessed accordingly.
So like a depreciation value is what you're using?
Yeah, essentially.
Okay. Like I could understand if you remove a porch or something that was there that no longer exists, like a porch or a garage or something, but you're actually reducing the value of a house that someone may be
But we're
living in?
tracking it, but we are tracking it. We keep it in our inspection files to determine, again, when the repairs occur,
Okay.
how they occur, when they're completed, that type of thing. And if the house is brought back into, again, good condition, then the assessment is changed accordingly.
Okay.
You good, Mr. Leclerc?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Walsh?
Getting back to this subset of the 21 appeals of $1.5 million or over, when you look at the detail on them, I have two questions. First of all, why do you think we're seeing this many appeals this many years after the last reval?
Don't want to speculate.
Okay. Could it have something to do with the fact that on the larger properties, real estate values seem to have either not gone up as much or leveled off or something else like that? Because on these larger houses, most of the appeals were granted, many for, 20 to 30 to 40% reductions.
Okay.
So the question becomes, are we starting to see more of these because the real estate values just are not matching what the assessed value is?
A lot of people are under the impression that their assessment should reflect the current market value. When in fact, the assessments need to reflect the market value of 2010 right now.
So people are challenging the 2010 value?
Yes.
Okay. And you've no speculation on why we're seeing more of these? And the reason I'm asking, Don, is because we've got a plan for next year. I mean, we've, so that's kind of where I'm going with this. Are we to be expecting that we're going to be seeing this many appeals again?
It's really
Or
hard
was
to-
this an
hard-
aberration?
Hard to speculate. It really is difficult to speculate. This year, didn't expect to see the appeals that we did see, to be honest.
Okay,
Did see a few more appeals than were expected.
all right. Which I guess leads me, unless you want to stay on the same subject matter, if there's other questions in this area, because then my next set of questions is going to go to the process and how we find out about stuff.
You want to follow up, Ms. Leclerc?
Well, I just wanted to know, what type of reasoning are people using for appealing? That they just think the value is too high? Or are there specific things they're presenting?
Again, the board heard the appeals, so
They don't report back to you or discuss it as a board?
what I was seeing in the folders, coming back, were appraisals that were dated October 1, 2010. Okay, and some of the decisions were made largely on the appraisals by certified appraisers.
Okay, and so if they presented an appraisal, they adjusted it to agree to that? Or did you provide your data then to compare and allow the board to?
The board, again, there's consultation. We have members of the staff that are always available for technical consultation with the board. I think there was maybe one or two cases where there were some technical questions that were asked of us. But again, these are questions that have to be directed to the board.
Okay, and are you noticing any repeat customers, that people who got denied in prior years came back again?
Not a lot, but there are, and the statutes are very specific on how those situations are addressed. 12111 allows for a reduction of an assessment once in a 5-year cycle. If no changes are made to the property, again, in that 5-year cycle, and they've already received the reduction, very simply, they cannot receive another reduction.
Mr. Becker? Thank you, Ms. Leclerc.
But if they disagreed with that reduction, they could receive one if they had gone to court then?
Okay, if they disagree with the reduction, they have to go to court that year of
At the time?
that year, within 60 days. In other words, they're noticed. Let's say the reduction occurred on March 20th, and they don't agree with the reduction of the board. They would have until May 20th to file an appeal with the Superior Court for that year.
Okay, and you're saying that these appraisals were dated of October in 2010. That's just, they weren't pulled in October of 2010, they were dated with the values being,
They're retrospective,
'Cause that's
what's called retrospective appraisals.
which is what they need to do realistically.
an appeal.
To do this, okay. But I guess on the repeat customer component, are we looking at people that, is it frequent for people that were, those are, so, okay, so if they had a reduction, they can't come back again at all. But if
Okay,
they were
they
denied,
can-
they can come back
They
year after
can-
year.
Okay, there are some limited exceptions where they can come back if they had a reduction. Okay, that's if they improve the property. If they change
Yeah.
something, component on the property, they can appeal that component, but they can't appeal anything else.
So limited numbers of people do, though, come back if they're denied and go, oh, I've got a new board, or I've got a new year, hey, let me try again, because they don't want to go to court. But also, there's people that perhaps had no idea about the appeals. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion in this town about the assessments. And I know I've come across a bunch of people who seem to have thought that their opportunity was back when it first happened. And you go, well, go down to the tax assessor's office, you can do it each year. Oh, I can do that? And I'm not saying a lot, but two, 3, 4 maybe over the last 2 or 3 years. And, so there's got to be a lot of other people out there that they sort of hear this and then they do a little research and then they go, oh, I couldn't go last year, so they do it this year. But when they do that, they only get it from this year.
Prospective, right, from this year
Yeah.
forward. It's not
You lost your
retrospective.
opportunity, yeah. In the
Right.
okay. All right, that's it off Mr. Walsh's line.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Leclerc?
Can I just ask, on these valuations, they're done by certified valuators, and they're done properly, you
Okay,
believe?
when you say valuations, are you referring to the appraisals that
So
are
the
done?
appraisals, yes, that they're using for the appeals process.
Some of well, they have to be licensed in the state of Connecticut.
As a licensed real
These
estate?
are licensed real estate appraisers, right?
Okay. And have you reviewed any of them? Do you know, like, are they properly prepared, that they're not considering things that happened after the fact? Evaluation has to be done based on October 10, and you can't consider things that happen after that.
Again, the key word is consider.
Okay,
Okay, sales can be considered, but again, without giving an appraisal course, all the market data around that time have to be considered in coming to a final valuation conclusion. They have to follow a process, an appraisal process.
within a reasonable period, but you can't look at something that happened in 2012 and compare it to 2010,
You're not supposed to.
right?
The courts generally will not, they'll allow you to look at it, but that's about it. They don't put great weight on
Okay.
further out market transactions.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking, that they're properly done, though, using the right time.
Within the time frame.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. Mr. Brackfeld?
First of all, thanks for coming out tonight, and I think this is an excellent preparation. It's pretty clear to me what the numbers issue is. I mean, we've had an interesting conversation, but to me, this is all inside baseball. I think the only thing that matters to the board, I think, and what concerned us at the last meeting, was the fact that we got a very big surprise on the grand list at the meeting when we were scheduled to set the mill rate, right? So I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm speaking for the rest of my colleagues, that I guess the question to you or Mr. Mayor or whoever would be, how can we get this information to the Board of Finance sooner in the process?
Okay.
I mean, these numbers, if I remember, were done in March or something like that. And we met in, what's today? Today's May 13th, right? So it was last week, early May, to set the mill rate, and we only found out about it essentially on that evening, or maybe the day before when we got the stuff emailed to us. So I guess the question to you or Mr. Mayor or both is, what can we do going forward to, for us not to be surprised like we were this year?
Yeah, I can start. Last meeting, when this first came up, a couple things. One, I mentioned initially that I thought I learned about this information late March, and then the budget director showed me an email from August 8th. I said, no, we got
April
it. Thank you.
Yep.
April 8th. And yeah, we got it. So I said, oh, I guess I got it April 8th. My initial recollection was the more correct recollection. We did get the information in March. The April 8th email was when the October list first came out in January. There was this is just side information that's kind of semi-irrelevant. There was a couple of mathematical tweaks that when I looked at, but that didn't impact my understanding that this number was bigger and greater than what was in our budget projections. As I announced at that time, I took this information to the First Selectman, and as I also announced last week, or mentioned last week, that it was my understanding that the First Selectman had talked with members of town bodies about this. Since then, I went back to the first selectman to ask him if my recollection was correct or incorrect. And he said it was correct. He also pointed out another fact, which was at your Saturday meeting on March 29th, David Thornton, member of the BAA, announced to you, and I watched the video today to confirm, that he's a member of the BAA, and he announced at your meeting from the podium that the BAA had just finished cutting $15 million from the grand list. That is also a bit irrelevant, but so I'm saying is that the information was out there, but you didn't hear it from me. So that's...
Yeah.
Mr. What would you have that cut number? Yeah, that.
It was 9.3 million.
Was 9.3 was the increase. Actually,
No, it was actually a $19 million cut, not a $15 million cut. So,
Yeah, 9 million was
so
the
a gentleman on the committee was off by $4 million.
Well, it depends on what he was talking about. You see, the 19 million is a combination of clerical adjustments and B of A adjustments. So he was off like $2 million or $2.5
Okay,
million.
but you know what, we're listening to about 100 people.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying it's not quite.
Okay.
I'm just saying it was
And
out
we're
there.
not sitting there taking notes.
No,
If we're
I
going to get
understand.
the information, we need to get it from.
No, I understand.
Okay.
So I just said two things, though.
Okay. Okay.
Did the first selectman, I heard you say the first selectman told our body?
Mr. Tetro informed me that he spoke to Mr. Flynn prior to the Board of Selectmen and prior to the Board of Finance votes as to how to address this adjustment. And they mutually discussed that it be handled when the mill rate was set, since that's when, it didn't impact the revenue or expense line items, and that generally, I guess they both understood it or agreed that that was when the grand list adjustments had been dealt with in the past.
So he explained to Mr. Flynn that there had been almost a 100% increase in what you had budgeted.
I have no idea what exactly. I'm sorry that neither one of them is here tonight. I'm
Where's
sorry
the-
that I have to carry this information.
Is Mr.
But-
is Mr. Tetro going to be here?
No, I have no idea what Mr. Tetro's plans are, and he did inform me that he couldn't make it tonight.
All right, can we ask and have the clerk make a request that the first selectman be at our very next Board of Finance meeting so we can hear from him directly on who he told and what he told them? Is that a...
Yes,
Through
no,
the
that's-
chairman, that's a formal
Yes,
request.
that's a reasonable request, most certainly.
I took it as a request. I was watching Caitlin write that down.
And to follow up, I guess, continue to follow up, when do we have the number, when does the BAA make a list of all of their reductions? They vote on it on a specific day?
Okay.
The state statute requires that it be completed by the end of March.
What day in March? Is October
Last-
30th? The last day?
I think it says last business day.
Yeah. I'll read the, give me a minute, I'll read the statute.
And when did they
Okay.
make it this year? Do you know what day they made it? Did they do it on the 30th?
Their last decision session was March 20th.
But all along, they're having decision sessions, so, no, they make them all in one day?
No. Generally, what the board has done in prior years and did this year was they have hearings the first 2 or so weeks, again, depending on hearing volume.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. With 120 some odd appeals this year, the hearing volume was such where we went 2 full weeks on hearings. Okay. They had to spend almost a full week on decision sessions. Okay, which brought us to their final decision session was March 20th.
Yeah, I was going to say, because when I'm looking at the decision dates that are on this detail sheet, there's not one decision. I mean, there's some decisions earlier in March, but there's not one decision after March 20th.
March 20th was the final decision date.
So by March 20th, did we have all of the decisions made at that point in time?
The board had finished its work. Now, we have notification requirements. Taxpayers have to be notified within a week of decision. So the priority, again, our office, we provide the administrative support. Our office spent a large part of that week subsequent to the March 20th deadline, preparing notices, sending them out. Okay, the balance of the time was spent getting the numbers right.
Okay. I guess my question is during the month, while these decisions are being made, from early March through the month, as they have a decision session, is there a way to have like an Excel spreadsheet that lists the property, the amount of the reduction?
Yeah, you have it.
This.
Yeah, the list,
Yep.
that's it.
And that's growing over time during the whole month of March?
Yeah. They start making their decisions, I think this year, again, I'm going from memory, I think they start making their decisions during the third week of March. So we'd get, let's say they do a night decision session, we get the decisions the next day. And then we begin processing. Again, keeping in mind we have to get notices out, that type of thing.
The question, I guess, is can we get this information so we know, we have a budgeted amount, which I guess you work with the first selectman's office when he's preparing his budget on what that amount we're going to put in the budget is? The $10 million this year? That was approximately.
Oh, you mean the budgeted, yeah, we chose $10 million this year. Actually, and I think Mr. Ross and I and Ms. Gardner, deliberated on that number. We thought it was conservative at the time we selected it, because we thought that the trend would be, given that we're in the third year, fourth year? I forget what year we're in, fourth year.
Yeah.
We thought the trend in the number of appeals would be down.
Okay.
So we thought initially it was conservative.
I guess the question is, could the Board of Finance get some type of either spreadsheet or to know before our last meeting,
You could have got it March 26th, obviously.
and know how far we are off on the variance? I mean, obviously, we're off $1 million. It's not that big a deal, one way or the other. But in this specific year, it turned out to be a bigger deal, and it caused a potential tax increase of about 0.1% increase. So I guess the question is, next year, if we could try to manage that, that would be, I think, for the board, a better situation. I mean, it's never really come up before that I've seen.
Yeah, well, it's kind of reading between the lines of Mr. Tetra's email to me about the issue and his conversation with Mr. Flynn. And I'm not speaking for either of them, but the logic that I see there is that the budget process is focusing on what is the revenue and what is the expense. That's one way of looking at the budget process. You want to make sure you value your revenue and calculate, forecast your revenue as closely as you can, and you want to manage your expenses the best you can to meet some kind of service level. A third element, a third variable comes into the equation, which is what should the tax rate increase be? And that's when this number becomes meaningful. Without that third variable, which in the past hasn't been like, there hasn't been like a target tax rate target. I just said target twice, I know. But I went to Jerry Lombardo's birthday party before I came here, so that explains that. But with that third variable being introduced in the equation, it makes this more relevant than it had been in the past.
Yeah, and I think it is that third variable, because I think while the administration might not manage to a tax increase, I know in my head, I do. So if I'm trying to fight to get to a number and making difficult cuts, or the RTM was doing the same thing, to make some cuts that were difficult and just to get to that number, and then to see it have to go back up again is a little it can be frustrating. I mean, we were able to manage it this year and I appreciate the help, and all the documents you prepared helped us be able to do that, and some of the things worked in our favor to be able to change some things around to still hit that. But
It'd be
now that
better
it's
to
come
have
up,
it.
I think that,
Right.
I think some of us are going to probably want to manage, or at least know what that third variable is. And I think most years it's not going to be anything. It's going to be right around the number you have, so it's not going to matter one way or the other. This was just that aberration year.
You could also end up with a situation, in fairness to the Board of Assessment Appeals, where sometimes they'll make decisions on smaller properties over maybe 2 days, and then they'll take the larger properties over 2 days. So the numbers that we might give you the first 2 days may not be indicative of where the number's going to go
Yeah.
the next 2 days.
And I'm not saying, Don, that I'm going to want to be updated along the way. I think the question is, before we make a decision at the end of March, could we get what their numbers are?
March 26th is plenty of time.
Yes. That's more the issue. It's just the total, because we can then see the total of what the BA is versus what the budget number was, to know whether there's any large gap there that we're going to have to be concerned about, which we won't know till the end of March.
Right.
I mean, I want the BA to go through their normal process and they're their own independent board and do what they got to do. But if we're making cuts to certain departments, if we're trying to manage to a tax rate, it would be helpful to know that number, to make sure we're close to budget.
Right.
Okay.
I'm in agreement. Mr. Becker? I'm sorry, you
I'm
finished,
done.
Mr. Wall?
Yes.
Yeah, no, and I don't know if we're trying to vote, or it's just more of a consensus, or, on those lines. I think pretty much everyone here seems to be on that. I mean, I'm in favor of, the BA does its thing within a day. That's probably always going to land before our Saturday session anyways.
Right.
So there's going to be some lead time, but I don't see why not. I mean, it's nice if they give the update with the however they do it, the smaller properties. Either way, it's that final number, and hopefully in most years it doesn't really swing much anyways. But before we voted here, and before like 3-something in the morning the RTM voted, I mean, the last question is, what's the tax increase number, right? I mean, and even more so than the budget. I mean, I watch both, but that's a big factor. Especially, I mean, look, I guess this year when you're teeter-tottering over one big number over, another at the 2%, but I mean, it's always a factor. But I mean, I'd be in favor of,
I think we'll know for next year. And the odds are it won't make a difference, but at least we'll know. Any other questions?
No, I'd like to
Mr.
thank
Ross?
Don. I mean, it's been very educational going forward, getting all this information and hearing this process on how it takes place. And also dispelling the notion, I think, that we left the last meeting with, was that a lot of this was from demolitions down on Fairfield Beach, and we're all thinking this is like a Storm Sandy situation that we're just dealing with now, which I know I left the table
Right.
believing. And
I want to clarify. There's been a lot of demolition going on
Yep.
constantly. And again, I don't want to speak without having the facts in front of me. That's why I would feel comfortable if I was able to send the whole spreadsheet that you could sort up by address, okay? And you could say, okay, what was the impact? And if you have specific questions and specific files, I got the files, I'm happy to give them to you.
Well, if you can send that to Ms. Bassi, and she'll
Okay,
pass
now
it
who
on
am
to
I
you.
sending
To Caitlin,
to Caitlin?
yes.
Okay,
Send that information to Caitlin, and Caitlin will pass it on to the
Okay.
Board of Finance.
okay. So I will send the
Sound okay with
spreadsheet.
everybody?
I'm just a little confused. What are you sending us?
I will send you
Gonna
the
sort
spreadsheet
this.
sorted up by
Okay.
location.
By location. So like the beach area, are you going to take the streets around the beach
No,
area?
it will just give you, I sort it by street. Okay, you know the streets in the beach area, you can go look at those specific streets and say, okay, what, was there action in that street? What action was taken? What was the reduction, if any? That kind of thing. And then if you have more questions, we have the files in the office.
Is there a way for your office to figure out which are the ones by the beach? No, I know, but I mean, it's just, each one of us is going to have to do our own independent
How
analysis.
is this sorted out then?
This is
That's sorted
out
by assessment value.
assessment
Okay,
values.
okay.
By numbers right here.
Okay.
Goes up.
Yeah, this is so small, I'm going to have to get much more powerful glasses, I think.
We're going to have to do 1117 paper.
Okay, so you're going to do it by, what's
I'm
your
gonna sort
plan
it
to
by
do it
street.
Mhm.
You know what I could do? We could sort it by map. We can sort by map. You know, map is another way of zooming in on, because tax map.
Right.
Tax maps in the beach area, 138, 139, 182, 184, you know, et cetera. You could sort it that way, too. I can send you both.
Why don't we just leave it at this? Mr. Ross will do his best to do something without doing an excessive amount of work and effort to disrupt his daily operational activity.
Well, and we're not asking for this tomorrow either.
I'll get it to you. I'll send it to Caitlin, and Caitlin will forward it to you.
Okay. If my map is the best way to do it, so we get it close to each street to a region, that'll work.
Well, how are we going to know what region? I mean, I don't know what map 180 is off the top of my
Okay,
head.
or I just send it sorted by location. If Excel spreadsheets,
Well,
you
yeah.
can sort it any way you want.
Actually, I was actually thinking about it, and I'm glad you raised your hand. I was asked, maybe we can get a little assistance from Public Works, and they can take a look at that list and maybe sort out what you would consider the beach area and the areas that were damaged. Would you be able to assist Mr. Ross and just go into his office? That'd be, it'd just be very helpful just to see that area, those areas. And I'm not asking, Don, you to have to determine
send
that.
her-
His
I'll-
office had to deal with all the cleanup and knows it probably right off the top of their heads.
I'll send her the spreadsheet.
Okay, that's
And
fine.
Caitlin, could you just send it to Public Works and have them
Thanks,
somehow
Scott.
prepare a damaged beach area?
Jim,
Yes?
Yeah.
really, if you see South Pine Creek Road on this map,
Mhm.
that's South Pine Creek Beach area.
Well,
Fairfield Beach Road, and you see other streets.
Yep. Well, I understand those two roads. Yeah, those are no-brainers, but I don't know every single street in the beach area and every little
Okay.
court and cul-de-sac.
Don't worry.
Map area.
Don't worry, Scott.
No, his map area that you're talking
We're
about,
good.
are you talking about map and lot number?
Tax map, yeah.
Tax map. And Pat, I don't know one map number off the top of my head in the beach area.
Mr.
I
Ross?
don't know whether that's one, because their number's like 160, right? Or
Yeah,
like
see,
one-
be done, but I'd be honest with you, I'd be afraid of missing.
How about this? We'll trust you to get it done. If not, we'll call you back and ask you the same
I'd
question.
just rather just send you the spreadsheet sorted with, by location and, you know, let people pull out what they want to pull out. I think that's the best way of doing it.
Okay.
That way you get everything, as opposed to, gee, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, you know. Don't want to run that risk.
Mr. Walsh? Well,
I'll talk to Public Works offline
let-
about it. I know.
All right, so let's be clear on how we're leaving this then. Mr. Ross, you're going to talk to Mr. Bartlett back there and get the map as close to the way Mr. Walsh is requesting as possible. Is that right?
Yep. Yes.
Great.
Just send an email to Caitlin, I'll take the addresses, I'll coordinate it the way you want it based on South Pine Creek flooding, Fairfield Beach Road flooding, etc.
Thanks, Mr. Bartlett.
All right, thank you.
Is it only beach and non-beach? You only need two?
Yeah, what I'd like to see is one area of beach.
Right, but those are the only
Or
two
storm sandy
classifications.
damaged areas.
Okay.
Storm sandy damaged areas.
Okay, that's reasonable. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Ross, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Don.
Okay. Just sort these.
Do you want to vote on moving the minutes?
I was going to do that last. You want to do that now? We're going to do that, no.
to bring it to here?
Here's what happened. Okay, it was brought up, let's take care of it. We'll take care of it. The first item on the agenda was to approve the minutes. However, in our last regular meeting last Thursday, a motion was raised to move to approve the minutes to our June meeting.
Yes.
Okay, and it was approved unanimously. So it's on tonight's agenda, so what we'll need to do is make the same motion and take the same vote to move it over to our regular meeting in June, to take it off of this agenda. So can I have a motion?
I'll make the motion to move
Becker?
to June meeting.
Second by Mrs. Leclerc. All those in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? We're good. That's off the agenda. So we're on our final item. To review the town financial position versus budget as of Q3 fiscal year 14. I'll turn it over to Mr. Mayor.
Firstly, I want to apologize for not getting this out Friday night, as we like to do and as you expected. Secondly, I want to apologize when we realized we couldn't get it out, not sending you guys an email, letting you know it wasn't coming. And I have one more apology, actually. In our actual rush to get it out on Monday, well, actually, two more apologies. Two things happened. One, the formatting for some reason messed up, so that's why you got new handouts tonight. The formatting is better and all the words are there. And the second thing, you're all familiar with the whole concept of the contingency transfers and all that, which we attempt to incorporate into this document where the numbers are meaningful, and we missed that, incorporating that number, the transfers into the DPW operations. So I'm going to hand out a revised top sheet.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna just make a comment. I'll turn it over to Mr. Walsh and Mr. Becker. But my comment is this, and first, thank you for your apology, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate it. There is a committee that was put together by Mr. Flynn to review the reports and the information on the reporting specifically for the quarterly, right? So we were asked to take a look at the information provided on each quarterly meeting and take just to review, the process, the consistency of the information that was on the reports, and we were asked to take a look at the timing of the quarterly meetings. So the committee was myself, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Stone, Ms. Bossi, and Mr. Mayor. I think what we need to do within the next 2 to 3 weeks is to get that committee back together, just to take a look at this whole process. Any suggestions or questions that come up tonight from the board would be welcome. But we're going to go through this variance report, and the variance report is the same report that we have reviewed over the last 2 quarterly meetings. And on this report, there's parameters on what makes what items make the report and what does not, therefore the consistency. So if a line item on if you look at the variance, the expenditure variance report, if a line item is plus or minus 5% year-to-date to budget, it makes this report, plus it has to be over $10,000. Okay, so that is something that we would need to review, but we do need to look at the process, just to ensure that we do get the information in a timely manner and that it's accurate, just so we do not have this situation again. But I thank you for your apology. Mr. Walsh?
I guess to follow up on that, and Bob, I appreciate your comments as well. But I think if we're going to do that, we do need to look at whether the parameters of the 5% and the $10,000 is either
correct.
too stringent. Because when we get a variance report on expenditures, are we expecting to get a 13-page report? Because that's what the parameters are producing.
Right.
And maybe those parameters should be adjusted so that the board only sees
6
slightly
pages.
larger variances, because with each of these variances comes a requirement for comments by department heads.
Right.
And I know that's time-consuming. I'm sure the department heads aren't thrilled about it, especially when they're little amounts and things like that. So I guess if we're going to...
That'll be part of the meeting, was to
But
take...
it would be interesting to hear from the other board members, if anybody has comments about that, prior to us meeting. Whether you think it's whether each of the board members in reviewing this thinks that those parameters are too tight and maybe should be loosened, so that when we get a variance report, it's not as detailed, or we're looking for larger variances, I guess.
For one, I would, I'm sorry, Jim. I think I would agree with where I think Jim is leading us. I personally have had an evolving opinion on the whole way we approach this.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally would be comfortable with the administration highlighting to us variances that we need to be alerted to be perfectly honest. I mean, I can see by Jim's face that that's probably a little too broad discretion, but my point, though, is that there are variances that maybe we could get in backup format, but that I don't think necessarily important for us to review on a quarterly basis, even if the numbers are more than $10,000 or more than 5%. There are variances that are explainable that I think we're wasting too much time. In other words, we know if we were all driving around town and we see gas is $5.50 a gallon, it shouldn't surprise anybody that hypothetically, that some of our energy costs are higher, okay? I'm not saying that we don't want to know about it, but I think that's what you're trying to get at, I think.
I guess we are trying to get at that. I mean, the question becomes is...
I mean, a report with 50 pages, hypothetically,
yeah.
and, I mean, I'm not interested personally whether or not a travel budget is $900 versus $800. I think we all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we obviously want to know, for example, if there is a special ed, and this is Board of Ed, obviously, but, there's a special ed cost problem of $1.5 million, right? So we know what we know what the extremes are, right? We all agree we need to know about the big special ed problem, and we don't need to know about the $100 variance on travel costs. The question is where in between. And
Yes.
I would skew personally, I mean, if you're asking for opinions
No,
for
I
your
am.
board, I would skew personally, at least on a quarterly basis, towards a more discretionary output from the first selectman and the CFO as to where variances are indicating a trend or a change in behavior that we need to know about, right? We're finding out that our school buildings are I don't know what it is. Jell-O was going up excessively, and our lunches are, I'm saying? In other words, something that is a trend that over the course of time, I was trying to come up with something, but over the course of time is going to indicate higher costs going forward, things that may make us adjust our thinking. But things that are just temporary variances or normal, you can't run a $300 million operation with the thousands of line items we have and not have all sorts of variances.
Well, some items are seasonal.
And there's seasonal stuff and all sorts of stuff. So that's, I guess, I'm not being as crisp as I'd like to be, but I guess.
But I get it.
My answer is more quality and less quantity of information for us on that score, I guess is the way I'd say it.
I'll take offense to the more quality part.
One thing we were trying to do, I'll just jump in here, I'll go to you, Mr. Becker, is we were trying to bring consistency, the committee was, to the reports. And one of the complaints that we had before these reports was, how does something make the report and why does it make it and others don't? So whatever we do, I think we need to answer those questions. So, anyway.
And I think
Mr. Walsh?
you're right. I think we were trying to be a little bit more objective. The problem is that, well, we didn't want to have to technically, I guess, rely on a first selectman who's managing this to only bring the good news and potentially hope we don't find the bad news and having to go through every line on 28 pages. When I see 28 pages and then we do what we're currently doing and I'm looking at 13 pages, it's really not that much of an improvement. So the question is whether we should get rid of the small dollar amounts, the $5,000, because in essence, on a $300 million budget,
Right.
who cares whether we're over by $5,000 until the end of the year, then we can ask questions about it.
Right.
And maybe change the percentages so that the number of variances is still staying objective.
Right.
The problem is trying to take out the seasonality, which a lot of these are. I mean, especially on the revenues and even on the expenses. So I think we can tweak it and try to make a better product.
I think you know where we're
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Becker? Go ahead, Mr. Becker.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was thinking here, what kind of percentages or dollar amounts, and, I mean, and as you bring up the seasonality of some of this, I mean, reading down, timing, I mean, a lot of this is all going to be cleared up by the end of the year. I mean, it's good to see, but I know on my end, I mean, one of the concerns that was expressed, I think, in the timing of getting this was how much additional time trying to get it to us. So by the time we got some of this, it was on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time, in my case, by the time you pass the weekend up, it starts getting a lot harder to even review these, and then be prepared for the next night for the meeting. So, I mean, if we're going to get them earlier, and I'm not even talking, even Friday earlier, some of these things even earlier, where we can actually spend some time with the better quality, quote unquote, not saying that this isn't, but to that concept, that may be more beneficial to us. The only thing was just looking at some of the percentages or dollar amounts. I'm trying to think of what your criteria could adjust to, because a lot of these, just because of seasonality, would fit into even greater, you adjust the percentage. Some of these are big percentage swings. So I'm not sure. There maybe has to be some other criteria like seasonality to just to clean up some of this. Maybe not, you know what I mean? Something a little bit more objective, but still where we as a board feel comfortable in
Right.
letting the administration, finance department kind of vet that out to not have to be in here.
Right.
Maybe that's a method.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Becker. Mrs. Leclerc?
One is, are you doing it either or of this 10,000 and 5%? So maybe if you did both, it has to be over 10%? And
It's
then
and.
And
It is and.
It is
It is
and,
and, yeah.
okay. And then, is there a way to compare it to the total budget? Because if a tiny budget is over 30,000, then maybe we want to know why. But if Public Works is over 30,000, that's nothing. So is there a way to measure it against, first look at the total budget to see if a total budget is doing okay, and then dig down deeper into the lines if the budget has a big difference?
And we could use whatever criteria we need to, obviously. So,
It's something we need to
I mean, yeah,
discuss.
like,
right?
So-
like DPW clearly has
Right.
big dollars running through it, but.
So how many pages, if you did like a summary sheet of all the budgets, that would just show if that is over, like the total budget is over a certain amount?
You mean total by department?
Yeah.
Oh.
So you could just get so, I don't know, I was thinking that, and then if.
If I may.
Yeah.
First, actually, a couple of things to say. This is actually an excellent process. There's two steps to this process. It is my belief and my understanding that the most important page is this one page.
Right.
Because I think that's what the interest of the board is. What does it look like the operations of the town are doing at the moment? And where will that lead us at the end of the year? And therefore, if we need to, what adjustments do we or should we make? Or what can we do or not do? So to me, it all boils down to this page. So the process kind of goes like this. And the process has been beneficial because we now, it's incredibly more labor-intensive, both from the department heads and the Department of Finance, than it was prior to the development of this process. And because of that more intense focus by the finance department, and therefore drilling down to the department heads, I know for certain with many of the departments, they are much more aware during the year about how much money they're spending, what they're spending it on, and what adjustments they need. Now, maybe some of the department heads were already totally on top of it, some were not. This process theoretically drives everyone down that path. So the first benefit is improved management focus on their budgets, on their individual budgets. So you have, and if you look at the 13 pages, only, I think, maybe 15 at the most are under $10,000. All right? So if you cut out those 15, you get 12 pages.
Right.
But then there's a couple of members, one specifically I'm thinking of the Board of Finance, who, if we hand out a document, whether it's 1 page or 50 pages, is going to have, what's it called, the Munis
report?
The Munis report.
Yep.
And that board, a member, or maybe another board member, is going to say, well, what about this one? So if you eliminate all your seasonality, if you eliminate all the things that are obvious, the question comes up anyway.
I think it's up to that board member to start learning, and
Well,
maybe it's up for the other board members to put pressure on that board member.
But it's a reality that we on the finance side are dealing with, and we're fine with it. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, in other words, so we could, absent people going through all the other detailed reports and pulling things out, we would just still do the same work. It would still take the same amount of time, but we could produce, I hate to say this after just ragging on Ken, we could produce a higher quality report from my perspective, because it would only focus on the important stuff. But you guys would have to trust that it's the important stuff. Because if you're going to go through the whole book and say, what about this, what about this, then we sit at these meetings and I say, I don't know, and then people get all irritated and upset, and then Mike gets upset because I say, I don't know. I mean, it's just...
Well, I think, Mr. Mayor, you bring up a good point, if I just jump in here, about the focus with the department heads. If it's done nothing else, if it's done that, then that's a great thing. So if you're using it as a management tool in a sense,
Totally.
to make sure that the
It's a
department
management
heads
tool
know where they are.
that didn't exist before.
That didn't exist before. It's just a report that we look at, but you're using it for real-life decisions and to ensure that your department heads know their numbers. So I think what we need to do as a board is to say that, knowing that, is what do we want to look at, right? And what's relevant to us. I mean, there's the munis report. Someone can go through that whole munis report if they want to. If they're going to ask the questions, they're going to ask the questions, but most people are looking at the more of the larger picture. And trends, as Mr. Bradfeld said. So I think it is a good idea to get this committee back together within the next 2 to 3 weeks. If, Mr. Walsh is the only member of the committee that's here.
Yeah.
And if you two agree, we'll try and fit in everybody's schedule.
I mean, one of the areas that has been talked about slightly here that it's frustrating for me that continually shows up on this, which I think maybe we can figure out a way to get it, is the whole seasonality accounts and just taking them off the report. Agreeing as a board, making a presentation to you that these are seasonal accounts that we cannot rely on, and it makes no sense to even look at them, because they're just going to show up, we're going to read false data and read that it's seasonal, and they just keep showing up.
Correct.
If we took the seasonal accounts out, we took out the under the $5,000, I think we'd start shrinking this report down.
Yeah, I'm not exactly...
But we'd have to agree as a board, we are going to take these out, so you're not going to see them. And we'd maybe list the accounts and have a standardized form that's attached to one of these reports saying, these are seasonal, they're not part of the report.
And there is a list on the last page of what this does not include. It would just grow.
Yeah, it would grow.
But there are many more timing issues than these. I mean, it's like...
those.
Like, 90% of your Parks and Rec is timing.
Yes. I understood. And I'm saying maybe we can pare through some of those, just so that we're not having to see that it's seasonal, we're going to catch up. Seasonal, we expect to catch up.
Because basically, we know that.
Yeah, I think because of past history, there's some lack of trust in the numbers, so therefore there was an expansion. We want to see everything.
Yeah.
But to do what you're suggesting, Mr. Wallace, requires some element of trust between your body and
Well,
the
it
department.
would, and it's going to take some common trust between actually you and your department heads, so that if it's worse than normal, so if Jerry's seeing something worse than normal, even on a seasonal account, he's got to raise that with
But
you.
we would still do the same work.
Yeah.
Right.
The work would still be done. The only difference would be is that you guys would only get what we anticipate, interpret as being important to give you, as opposed to giving you 13 pages, half of which probably
Which will
is
come up
meaningless.
as a committee
Well,
and report to the Board of
Well, I would
Finance.
hope it would be a little less work, in that on all those seasonal accounts, you wouldn't have to keep, let's just keep taking Jerry, since it's his birthday. Well, why don't we just, Jerry you wouldn't have to keep going, or whoever comes in your department has to go to Jerry and say, Jerry, why is this number over? Why is this number over? Because he doesn't have to report on that.
But I disagree.
But no, go ahead.
I disagree, because I think there's times that it's timing, but there's other times where he could know that in the fourth quarter, he's going to have a substantial increase or decrease, and it's only going to be known if we ask him to look at all of his accounts.
Well, I think that's where the trust level is going to have to come out, and I guess each of the department heads is going to have to go through a variance of the.
Well, it's the same exercise.
They go
and-
through Munis and look at this stuff and say, hey, you know what, I better tip Bob off, or the finance department off, that, you know what, this equipment line, all our equipment got destroyed in a flood, so we're going to be way off there, so even though it's a seasonal thing, this is more than seasonal.
But I think it's more
Yeah,
than
but he
that.
has to look at that to know that.
Yeah, well, he's going to have to go, I think almost all
Yes.
of them have to go through the municipal.
Right, so it's the
Exactly.
same
munis report.
exercise.
Same, that's what I'm saying, it's the same work, that's
Yeah.
what I'm
I'll
saying.
just make one comment and turn it over to Mrs. Leclerc, is what you're saying is, again, you keep doing what you're doing. It's, what we have to figure out is what you're going to present to the Board of Finance in our committee, right? Okay.
That would be my interpretation, yes.
Right. Mrs. Leclerc?
I think I sort of disagree with the seasonal, because some things like snow plowing, if we've had a really bad winter, we want to know about that. Or if like oil costs go suddenly up and our paving is costing more and running our vehicles is costing more, we would want to know that seasonally, just so we have an idea that that's happening. So, I don't know.
Okay.
Those
No,
are the
thank you. That's-
examples I can think of, but.
It's something we'll consider in our committee. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so if we can, with that said, thank you very much. And where do you want to lead us off with, Mr. Mayor, your
Well,
summary
I would
report?
start with the top page, but I'm obviously open for questions because I got tons of detail.
Go ahead.
Try not to disappoint.
Right.
And I'm looking for something that Caitlin there it is. December 31st, quarter end, when we reported in February, the subtotal for the revenue was a positive $900,000 approximately. The subtotal for the expense side was a negative $472,000 for a net estimated variance 3 months ago of positive $425,000. The document you're looking at today shows that number approximately $800,000 more and on the bottom line, larger positive estimated variance. Approximately about $500,000 of that comes on the revenue side, about $300,000 on the expense side. The big issues are, and one I'm going to talk about a little bit that was also part of last week's conversation, one of the big ones is current year tax levy. Last quarter, when we're looking at current year tax levy, we were projecting a $700,000 favorable number. That number has been reduced to a $192,000 favorable number. Now, if you remember last week, when we spoke about the different collection rates and how they can vary, the way this number has been calculated for the purposes of this report is collections through May 7th plus last year's collections, May 8th through June 30, multiplied by the 1.024. In other words, the tax increase this year. Now, that number, with this favorable variance, actually gives us a collection rate for the year of 98.51%, which is less than the 98.79 that we all agreed on last week. If you remember last week, I said the number was in the range. When I did that very same exercise for April 30th, I came up with a collection rate of 99.1. And then that 98.79 is just kind of in the middle. That's why I feel, so it's kind of like you could be conservative and go less, you can be aggressive and go with more. But, I monitor this, kind of throughout the year. It fluctuates up and down. But So this is kind of, at the low point, right now. So, as far as what the estimate would be, the 98.51. But that was the latest information, best information, so it's the number I used.
That can change.
Yes. Yeah, it changed between April 30th and May 7th.
For the worse.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the numbers that we look at, that we try to make sense out of. And again, it still shows us with a $192,000 favorable variance.
Right. Mr. Beck, you had a question on that?
No, that was the only thing I was
No?
going to say. At the end of the day, though, we're still favorable
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
December 31, we had a prior year tax levy. Actually, this has gone the opposite direction. We had a negative $300,000 in that. Now we're showing about a positive $100,000. That's again, just looking at the cash flow, looking at last year's, looking at the average per month, and kind of melding it all together. Interest on delinquent taxes looked real close to right on at the end of last quarter. There's, along with the change in the prior tax levy number, there's been higher prior year tax levy amount collected. With that comes interest. People pay their prior year taxes, they pay their interest. So the interest on delinquent tax number has gone from approximately on budget to a plus 172. And then, of course, the conveyance taxes, which last quarter were pretty much right on budget. You can see, based upon the latest information, we're looking at 610,000 positive on conveyance tax. There's just a lot of activity there. The rest of the items are pretty much...
Can we stop there for a second, Bob, the conveyance taxes?
Sure.
It says 610 here, but in the comments, it says 535 expected surplus for fiscal year 14.
You have to add in the recording fees also, the 75.
Oh, that's a conveyance, that's
Yeah,
within
both.
conveyance taxes?
That's both, yeah.
It's both, okay. Okay. And half of that amount was from the one sale of the Cleveland properties to the REIT fund, correct?
A big portion, I don't know the exact
I think
allocation.
it was like 300, it was just shy of, I think, $300,000.
Big number.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of, and on the expense side...
We talk about revenue, can I ask a couple questions before we move on?
Oh, sir, I'm sorry, apologies, yes.
So the police parking ticket revenue continues to stay down, and is that primarily still at stuff that has to do with, are those tickets just downtown because the train station?
It's the train station, and actually, Caitlin can take over the detailed questions, possibly, but...
All train stations.
It's obviously that the train station is opened up. There's other, when there wasn't parking spaces, you got a $6 daily ticket to park, or some number, I don't really know, actually. And now you don't get that anywhere because everybody goes to the other train station and parks.
Yeah, I think a lot of it-
1,300 people have permits now, then you have to have permits.
I
And
think people used to illegally park, too,
Yeah,
more
people used to illegally
near,
park, right.
near the train station, because they
Right.
couldn't find a spot when they finally got there. So now that they
Yeah.
split the stations, there's plenty of spots.
Yeah, and they're not totally enamored with their new handheld devices. I know they're starting to talk about maybe looking at, something else. They're using them, they're beneficial to them. They were hoping for more, and they've learned a lot. And so now they're thinking about, hey, we could maybe even do more slick stuff, and maybe we can do better. So there's some discussion between the parking authority and the police department on that subject matter as well.
The park and recreation revenue, the negative 223. What's the primary driver?
Penfield.
Is Penfield? But are we
Penfield's the
getting-
primary, I think that's 80 of it, and the rest is weather at the golf courses, and
At the
then
golf
anything
courses.
related to Penfield.
The Penfield stuff, are we being covered by insurance on the lost income by an insurance policy?
We have not a commitment, we have a submittal for $323,000, I believe, or very close to that, $328,000 that we have submitted to them. We will not get that this year,
Fiscal 14?
fiscal 14.
Okay, so Mike,
We will receive that money eventually, but not this year.
so that's more than what the park and recreation revenue's off? It's going to be, that's if we get the whole thing, and our claim is,
Yeah, I assume some of that actually is, I mean, when was the storm? I mean, that probably, I think, is that more than 12 months' worth of expense?
probably goes back to 12 too, right?
Yeah, so it's
Or
more
I
than.
mean, 13? Fiscal year 13, so it probably goes back a couple of years,
Yes, it goes
correct?
back since the storm.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so it's more than the fiscal year, so it should be more.
Okay.
So that works.
I'm set
Mr.
on
Walsh?
revenue.
All right. Expenses?
Yeah, on the expense side, the big change, and, I just did not get time to do it. But we did sit down, I mean, sometimes, not sometimes, but frequently, with some of the big ones with major changes, we don't just do emails, we do sit-down sessions, and we did have such a session with Mr. Liddy and Mr. Michelangelo and Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott's here to talk about, we thought there was enough actually going on in DPW that we asked Mr. Scott, Mr. Bartlett, to be here tonight to address any questions you might have about that. We actually thought about asking Mr. Chief Liddy to be here, but I don't know that kind of got lost. But basically, going back to this as a management tool, when we looked at the December activity in February, and then the police realized they were projecting to be a little bit off, over budget, and I'm not sure exactly what adjustments have been made, but they're now expected to be under budget by about $84,000. That's really the only big change there. That's the big swing. DPW is in at 478, even though, so it's $48,000 more, even though we didn't have my storm and a half.
Got it.
Thank God, that's right.
But, or it'd be more, right, it'd be 578. In the department, Linda and Caitlin, department heads, they put a lot of energy. I review all the stuff. We all put a lot of energy into it, and just try to bring forward what we think. Last year, I remember we actually came in really close at the end of the year, based upon what we did at this time. So this year, we'll see.
Well, Mr. Bartley, you were kind enough to come tonight, wait patiently.
You got another job to do for us?
Right. You leave with an assignment.
It's all good. Yeah, basically, like Bob said, we are looking at a deficit of about 478, which largely could be attributed to the winter. And the other glaring account for us is our buildings and grounds, which has been hit with some unforeseens, like the Fairfield Woods Library. We had appropriated funding for a roof, so celebrate that, we get the roof repaired. But unfortunately, we have a mold issue inside the building, so what hits the operations end was $73,000 worth of mold decontamination, removal of sheetrock, things, to that effect. So those are probably like the two biggest drivers in our budget to date.
Can I ask a couple questions? Sure.
One interjection here on that. That's an interesting project there, because there is a non-recurring on the roof.
What?
The roof was is an approved non-recurring project.
Yeah.
And so this board could, if they wanted to, fold this into that. In other words, add it to that resolution, or let it run through operations. Obviously, since we have an estimated positive variance, but just for future thinking, and when these things come up, when there's things like that, there are options.
The non-recurring that we just voted on?
The roof, which was voted on
It's a couple years ago,
couple
right,
years
Scott?
ago.
That's correct.
So added on to that?
There's,
You could, yeah, because it's related.
Is the mold caused by the roof damage?
it was contributed to. I'm not sure it was the sole factor, but it was contributed to from the roof, yes. And there's about a $40,000 balance, and the roof is done. So as Bob points out, that's something that personally, from an operational standpoint, if I'm looking at a $73,000 deficit and I'm looking at a bond that's holding $40,000, obviously we can eat into that deficit nicely if we can do that. That's up to you or Bob's office, but that's something that we might want to consider.
All right, maybe we should talk about another meeting? What do
We
you think?
we could talk about another meeting, but as Mr. Mayor points out, we also have a surplus of $1 million. But it's certainly something that we can
Yeah.
entertain.
Can I ask?
Yeah, I just mentioned it because these are the types of things that we think about, and that you guys, once in a while, it might be the right thing to do. And
Right, it might be. Mr. Walsh?
So Scott, out of the 478, it's approximately 73 is this mold issue, correct?
That's correct.
And am I led to believe the other $405,000 primarily is excess snow removal costs from all the storms we had?
That is correct, yes, and I have a breakdown of that. I'm not certain if it ever made it to you, but I've sent it through finance in the past, so I can get you that.
Okay. I mean, we might want to just see it just only because it's such a big year, but whatever, so.
Okay.
Now, how is this impacting what you do for paving for this spring? Because I know sometimes you've used your paving account as kind of almost a contingency account, like we'll hold off on some of the paving because we had a really bad winter.
Right. Well, hopefully it won't
Okay.
impact it, because obviously we all know what the RTM recent vote was, so I feel we're going in on the
Yeah.
skinny July 1st. But you are correct, we do take it as our responsibility to balance our budget
Sure.
end of June. So we will be watching that, and you're right, it was a big account, so in previous years, we might have held back in paving. But we'll be eyeballing other accounts and hopefully be able to hold back on some of those and expend some of the paving, which we feel is really needed after this winter.
So how does this work? If we do transfers, we could transfer funds into his account, but then you could not obviously order it before June 30th, before we knew what happened, but you can put a hold on some of those funds so he could do it after July 1st? How does that work? Or does he have to order this stuff before June 30th?
Bob and I might have a difference of opinion on this, but in
What's,
previous...
I don't know what the
adminis-
accounting term is that where you put a hold on funds or whatever.
Well, in previous
And roll them over to the
administrations, I was allowed to encumber.
Encumber, that's.
I was able
that's the
to,
name.
I would be able to encumber a segment of money
Yes.
at the end of June to spend rapidly,
Yes.
in July. I'm not sure if Bob agrees with that financing, that's up to him, but that, I know I was given that luxury in budgets past, yes.
Only because with what, you're right, with what's going on with the paving thing, I don't want to, I'd prefer if you guys are using some of this money till you balance your budget by the end of June.
Right,
We're going to lose 400 and something thousand dollars out of paving,
potentially.
potentially, unless we do something, move funds in, and then encumber them so you can get the work done soon after that.
Correct. Yeah, just a couple clarifications. I think there's kind of like three categories. In my mind, and Caitlin, please dive in here. If I say something, Rick. In my mind, an encumbrance, a technical encumbrance, is someone has performed a service, and we owe them the money. It's like an accounts payable in your business. Okay, so that's an encumbrance. Then you have, okay, there's money in the budget, but that was designated for a project, and we didn't get to the project. And that ends up being recorded as an encumbrance. I call it a loose encumbrance. So it's like a carryover.
Sure.
Okay, what you'd be talking about is an add-on, which I think would require Board of Finance
The
approval.
Board of Finance approves the reappropriation and encumbrances. They're treated the same way in accounting terms. One is there's a purchase order and one is there is not.
Okay.
But all of them go to you guys in September to say yes or no. Typically, in the past, reappropriations have been the larger projects that don't have the POs. The encumbrances, if there's a PO, there's usually a good reason as to why we're carrying it forward. I mean, I don't do it for to nickel and dime these accounts. It's for larger dollars, and there's a reason why the funds need to be carried forward.
So if we wanted to give Public Works a way to know that they can get that paving done, what would we have to do by the end of June 30th?
Well, my question is, there's how much left, and you're saying that you wouldn't be able to pave it all by June 30th?
Oh, no, I can, what's left in the current paving budget will be expended by
Right.
June 30th, I
Okay,
think.
so which funds are we talking about?
I think Mr. Walsh is saying that if I'm going to hold back on paving or even anything else in lieu of getting work done, he's trying to say if he can shift money over.
Yeah,
to help
and maybe
offset
maybe
that.
I'm mistaken with Scott with regards to the process. Maybe you plan on spending the entire paving account
Yeah.
and going negative in the account.
Right.
Because maybe I misunderstood you, because you were like, yeah, we do kind of use it as a contingency account. But in this case, you're almost telling us you're going to spend the paving account then. Or maybe you're in the process of doing that right now, and that you're just going to end up with a negative $478,000 is what you're telling us, and that we're going to have to do something to cover that.
Well, and
Is
as
that
you
what
know,
he's selling?
legally,
Yep.
I think that's what you're saying, because I've never seen Scott have a problem using up all of his paving dollars.
Okay, so I misunderstood you then.
So that's my first thing. Secondly, legally, it's by department. Scott cannot be over $478,000.
So what happens?
We need to transfer into his budget from another expense side. I can't use revenue side. From an expense item, typically it's a department that hasn't expended all their funds.
Okay.
And in
So-
this case, we know we're transferring in contingency dollars that I think were already incorporated into this number.
All right,
Okay.
I'll let Mrs. Leclerc just jump in.
So we could take the money from vacancies or contingency and transfer it into his budget.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think he's already getting
Some
some,
credits.
Well, not from contingency. Contingency is. that
is
has
going to be
nothing in
used
it.
up. But there's other departments that are going to be under budget
Vacancies here.
Okay.
that we would then
I get it.
transfer those dollars in.
I misunderstood you, Scott. So you are going to spend all this money, so that's good. That's what I really
appreciate
wanted to
the help,
protect.
though.
No, no.
Scott wanted that, and then he wanted it, the additional 500
If
on
you want
top
to do
of
it
that.
twice, you're good with that, too.
Mrs.Leclerc, anything else?
Well, I guess the question to Scott is, have you been holding off, like, because of our Board of Ed issue, or on paving and other things that you would normally do?
The only thing we held off as it related to the Board of Ed issue was a $42,000 purchase on our capital line of a truck, and Bob got in touch with us after the Board of Ed released the good news to them, so we can order that. But we had put that on hold. So as far as the Board of Ed issue, that was the only item. Again, we do feel it's our responsibility to balance the budget, so when you ask me, what is it we're going to do, how we used to try to balance the budget was all the line items related to payroll, so regular payroll, overtime, part-time, seasonal, make sure that's all balanced at the end. This year, it's a little more challenging because we had like $204,000 just on the snow overtime over budget. But again, it's our responsibility, so if we hold back a little seasonal staffing or reduce some part-time hours to get to that number, we will. And that's the same way we look at our accounts. If there's certain things that we have to shelf, it's not that they won't be done, but they'll potentially hit
Right, It
next
doesn't
year's
have to be
budget.
paving.
It doesn't necessarily have to be paving. But unfortunately, given the winter and given the current formatting moving forward with the paving, I would like to expend everything I could on paving
Yes.
out of this budget.
Because I think it was a very hard year on your roads.
Correct, it was.
Thank you, Mrs. Leclerc.
Thanks.
Mr. Walsh?
I'm all set with Mr. Barr.
Any other questions for Mr. Becker?
Yeah, thank you. So on the, going back to the police parking revenue?
Well, I'm sorry, are there any other questions for
did
Mr.
that-
Bartlett?
Yeah, no, no, I've got nothing else on him. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
We're
You're
done.
very welcome.
Don't wanna jump
Thanks,
in.
Scott.
Yeah, we're
Sorry,
done with-
Mr. Becker.
No,
Just
yeah, I
wanna let
thought
him
we were
go.
clear with him, sorry, you're still soon. So,
Mr. Becker?
yeah, no, just going, yeah, sorry, jumping to the police parking component. Is that gonna affect this next budget then too? Like, because that's a big number.
Theoretically, we took that all in consideration when we
Did.
prepared the budget.
We did.
This
We went
new
through it.
adjustment that's, okay, so we'll be, So as long as once we get through this year,
Yeah.
at this point, we'll be fine. All right. And.
They reduced their budget.
Yeah, they reduced it accordingly. So as long, we're just got to ride out this year, take the loss, and move on. Okay. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Becker. Mr. Walsh?
On the Board of Education line, 103, I wasn't here for all of Dr. Title's presentation, but it doesn't sound that he's going to need the 103, correct?
The 103,000 is the bottom line of his chart.
But he's,
I'm just saying, it's the
Okay,
bottom number.
sure.
It's about negative 103, which is the last information we had. Mr. Tetra indicated to me this afternoon that he met Mr. Title, and Mr. Title thought would cover it all. Dr. Title, excuse me, made that same comment here at the session. So yes, that, at this point, right now, the information is that won't be necessary.
all right, could we update the form and just so that we knew what it was officially now that we're at this meeting for the 103, so we should be almost at $1,314,000? I just want to be as accurate as possible.
Do I need to send it back out? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think we should have, I think you should send it back out. I think we should have that be the final version.
Should I go
because
back and
because
run the
that's
tax numbers again and recalculate those?
These
and-
tax numbers? No, I don't think
Well,
so.
no, I did it through
They'll be
May
another
7th.
week,
Should I
now
do
we
it,
have 6 days.
should I do it through May 14th? I mean,
No.
every number on here is going to change.
Every number is going to change, but
So what
one
you're
of the-
saying, well, I guess what you're saying, Mr. Mayor, is that as of March 31, that 103 was in? Actually, it was probably more.
Well,
than that.
as of when this report was done, over the weekend and Monday morning, that was the number. I mean, if we go back, I mean, I can change any number you want. I can, but I don't see,
Mr. Walsh, you want that number?
but
Well, I just think that when we compare it from third quarter, I mean, Bob, you're giving us numbers right now, tonight. You quoted numbers, all the numbers from December 31st, okay?
If
So
I
you
did,
qu-
yes.
You quoted them, you said $900,000 for revenues, what you told us, what you were anticipating. You told us revenue numbers of 472, with a net estimated variance of 425. I wrote them down while you were talking. So we use these historically from one quarter to the next, and what I'm saying is there's a category in there that we know is gone now. So I'm just saying that when we compare it to whatever, we should, it'll just help us be more accurate to what the number is.
Ms. Leclerc?
I'm wondering if,
mean-
Bob, in the future, can you do quarterly columns so we can see how it changed throughout the year? I think that's kind of what Jim's asking too, right?
Well, I think.
well, that's what
So we
I
can
did
see
quarterly
the
columns. I
variance,
kind
how
of,
it
I mean, I did it verbally.
Right.
I mean, earlier you were talking about less information, more, I'm
Right.
talking about more.
Right.
Just, be consistent, please.
I like more, they like less.
Okay, Ms. Leclerc, I guess that'll be taken under consideration.
I will.
How about Mr. Walsh's request? Can you take that out? and
Sure,
amend it?
yeah,
Thank you very
sure.
much.
Yeah.
Mr. Becker?
I was just going to say, even at the last meeting, the PD number wasn't even anywhere, right? It was a misunderstanding between two.
That's true, I didn't
That
send
was
that,
like
do
a
you want that one
200K
too? Do you want
swing,
December sent out
so-
again for?
Right.
No, it's just, I mean, it's a great sheet, but it evolved, yeah, I mean, the difficulty is, this last time, the
Right,
PD
there
number,
were-
really,
there
the number
were
was like
some-
6-something, not 4-something, because there was just miscommunication between,
There was some significant problems with what happened with the police department last time, with respect to their numbers. That is a correct statement.
yeah. I mean,
Go ahead,
outside
Mr.
of that,
Becker.
I mean, I like this sheet. I know it didn't exist a couple of years ago, and it was done off the top of people's heads, and then it existed in an early form, and, I mean, it keeps getting better. I don't know so much about, having to constantly keep running. I mean, that's it. I mean, if a particular member wants it, I mean, by all means, but I do think, within reason, I mean, look, if you can add the columns in, the quarters or something, the only problem then is that you're probably going to find that certain things are on here, certain things are
Yep.
not on here, so then you're going to have more,
Right.
more lines that you're going to have disappearing in theory. So, I think what I'm going to personally do is take my printed copy and make sure that that's the one piece of paper I bring to each quarterly, but, to compare. But the only question the only thing I would have, not even just so much this sheet, but it was mentioned, there was an email that Caitlin sent on Monday morning, and then there was a follow-up with additional information, but it was mentioned, Bob, that you've got some updated info that was actually handed to us tonight. If we could just make sure that any of this stuff comes to us in electronic form and kind of mentioned, so if this is outside of those.
Yeah, this is the only
you
thing
can-
that didn't.
This is the only, okay, so none of these were adjusted
Oh, okay, no,
beyond.
well,
No, it was my fault. I had a
I
formatting
archived it.
issue on my.
there were formatting
Words
issues
got
which
cut
got
off.
correct, which basically, when we printed them Monday at whatever time it was, racing for noon, but I think it was like 1 o'clock. When we printed them, it looked, she hit save. She hit save, we read them, they were great, but when it went out, when it got transmitted, and I don't know what happened, if you figured out what happened, it just didn't get transmitted the way it looked to us.
There was 3 or 4 cells that had a lot of verbiage in it that got cut off at the bottom. That's all it was.
So basically, because that, when we noticed that today, so we
That's
brought,
the only difference.
but we can email
Yeah.
the current one out tomorrow.
Yeah, I just take all your emails and drop them in a folder on the, no, I archive it and then get rid of the paper.
Okay.
But I do still ask you for the paper every meeting. It's just yeah, but that'd just be helpful for consistency.
Thank you, Mr. Becker.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments on the revenue or expenses? Well, I think we've come a long way, though, with these reports, so we'll just continue to work on them. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and Ms. Bassi. So if I don't see any more questions or comments, can I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Walsh, seconded by Mrs. Leclerc. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.